we'll go ahead and begin. My name is Jason Hubbard, and you're here with us for SalesIntel and SalesRoads on 5 strategies to set 20% more appointments in 2020. David, if you'll go to the next slide. There we go. So, like I said, I'm Jason Hubbard. I'm Vice President of Growth at SalesIntel. We have David Kreiger with us from SalesRoad. David, welcome.
Hi, Jason. Great to be on.
Great to have you. Cool. All right, so we'll go ahead and get into it. So for general format today, David's our guest, so we'll have David kick it off and introduce the slides, and then we'll sort of have it be as conversational and informal as humanly possible. David and I both have done quite a few presentations on ABM and targeting, so it should be informative and great webinar for everybody. David, I'll let you run from there.
Great. Thanks so much, Jason. Thanks, everyone, for joining this afternoon. So, today we're going to talk about 5 tips that will increase your appointments by at least 20% in 2020. And so we just tried to distill it down to 5 good nuggets you guys can take away from today's webinar. And so we'll go through each one by one. We start with a little bit more in-depth ones and finish with a few little punchy ones as we go along here. So tip number 1 is to save time by creating a perfect calling list. And so really, a lot of times we're eager to get into our calling, to really start a campaign. And what we've seen time and time again is just spending some time up front, really thinking through who you want to call, who the right prospects are, saves countless hours on the back end. And, why would somebody want to spend their time selling sand at a beach when you don't have to, and you don't, right? But we've all been there. We've all called through lists where, these are prospects who just can't buy from us, are not target prospects. And with the tools that we have at our disposal and the methodologies that are out there, so much time can be saved by just really thinking a little bit more deeply about your target customer, who your target customer isn't, and building that list. And so as part of this, really we look at this as a 3-step process.
Hey, David, before you go into
go ahead,
details,
please.
Yeah, so I'm sure you've seen the same, but in the last 3 or 4 years in particular for me, I've seen a lot of changes happening, both within the industry and also within our tech stack. So, you rewind 10 years ago and marketing automation was really only in the hands of the large enterprise. You rewind 5 years ago and, the sales acceleration, sales automation, call center type technology was just starting to roll out the door, starting to proliferate down into the smaller, SMB companies. And what you kind of saw as those technologies emerged is you saw people sort of doing a spray and pray approach. You had the ability to send emails in bulk. You had the ability to run through massive call lists. And so people sort of moved away from having to do sales and marketing 101 and really focus on qualification, and instead went just the pure volume route. In a lot of ways, we're right now paying the results of that. Everybody's inboxes are full. Everybody is filtering and not answering calls from anybody that they don't recognize. You even have legislation coming out, blocking, automated dialing, robo-dialer, stuff like that. And so, it's where we all sort of had the advantage of technology. That technology has sort of come back to bite us in the butt. And so it's sort of back to sales and marketing 101. You've really got to dial in on who you're going after and targeting, because you can't just rely on spray and pray anymore.
100%, and it's such a good point, Jason. And really, it's done a disservice to our industry, and it's done a service to our prospects, because we've gotten, in some ways, because we've relied on those tools, away from the humanity of selling, right? And selling to people and understanding who we're talking to, and understanding their needs and what's making them tick. And ironically, what we're seeing have the best results is really, backtracking here, right? And really diving into the humanity and really thinking about prospects as people. And that really does lead us into what we're talking about here, which is trying to figure out who are those people that we want to have those conversations with? And tip number 2 as we get into is really, how do we figure out what makes them tick and what's part of their inner voice, so that we can speak to them and we're not doing that spray and pray and we're really relating to our prospects. So great point, Jason. And so, to that, developing and figuring out who those people are, so you're not doing the spray and pray, as Jason says, and really going in a targeted way. There's a lot written about it, right? And it can be complicated, but really it boils down to 3 semi-simple steps, right? One is determining who your ideal customer profile, and the way to do that is just look at those clients that you have that have the highest lifetime value, right? Make a whole list of them. And then, there's a great book on this by Del Ravella called Buyer Personas, and that's what we've leveraged, is that methodology. And really the crux of it is doing in-depth interviews with those key customers. And that's not like a quick little, MailChimp survey or whatnot. It's really getting them on the phone and talking to them. And the key question to ask them is, tell me about why you started evaluating partners for X, right? Whatever your product is, services, for us, it's sales outsourcing. And what changed that caused you to start looking for a partner? So you want them to think that. That's not when they signed the contract with you. That's not when they got their first proposal. It's that moment. And it's really a moment right before they started thinking about this problem they had and started looking for you to help them to solve that problem. And when you do that and you go back to that time, you really get some tremendous insights. When we ask that of a lot of our clients, a lot of times they thought back to a meeting that they came out of, with either their boss or investors, or could be a wide variety of folks, and they were sweating that they were not hitting their numbers, right? And that they needed to figure out a way to turn their ship around, their sales team around, or else they might not have a job, right? Or they might not, their company might not get that next round of financing. And I remember one client who specifically remembered a call he got from one of his investors, and said, listen, he was an early investor, and said to him, listen, if things go the way that they're going, we're not going to be around for 6 months. And he said that to me as I'm doing this interview. And so it really you start thinking about who your buyer is and what's behind the reasons why they turn to you. And then, secondly, after you started thinking about that, I would argue that you need to think as much about who your best clients are not, right? Think about your non-target prospects. Look at all your no's. Look at all the conversations you've had where somebody didn't want to buy from you or couldn't, or more importantly, couldn't buy from you. And write them all down. Put them all into a spreadsheet, and you'll start seeing trends. And once you have all that data aggregated, then you've got great resources, like SalesIntel, to be able to then leverage that information to develop that targeted calling list. So Jason, anything to add there?
Yeah, no, I love the attention you made or paid to understanding the motivations for, why people bought or why people didn't. One of the things people harp on a lot, and I think they miss a crucial piece to it, is go back and look at your data, look at who you closed, who you lost deals on, even further than that, look at the people that you closed quickly or the ones that took a really long time to close. Because sometimes the amount of time and effort that goes into it, especially if the deal size doesn't justify it, it's just not worth going after them, even if you successfully close them. But keep in mind also, the data can lie. So even if you go and look at the ones that you've closed deals that you've won, and you start seeing similarities across those, and we'll talk about some of those things you can use to filter, to pull similar types of companies from it. Things like firmographic information, how big is the company, how old is it, how many employees do they have, how much money have they raised, what series are they on, where are they geographically, what industry or vertical are they part of, technographic stuff, like what technology platforms do they use, in particular if your product plugs into or integrates with different technologies. This obviously becomes super important. But it's easy if in particular if your data set's not really large. So for instance, if you sell into large enterprises and you may close 20 or 50 deals in a year, That's not a huge data set. And so there's always a risk that you're going to have some outliers in there that are going to skew your data. And so if you don't really understand what drove those decisions, and use that to help extrapolate and help you really understand your data, then oftentimes it can be really easy to learn the wrong lessons from it. So, paying attention to those things, sort of those soft touch things, as opposed to just looking at purely the data side of it, is really important. And yeah, on the data front, of course, even if after you identify the accounts, the companies that you want to go after, what your ICP is, the missing gap there, even if you're going all the way down to prospecting on LinkedIn and finding the right decision makers, you've got to figure out who you want to reach out to at those companies, who are the right personas, the right decision makers. I mean, each time somebody does a study, there's more and more people that are at the table making a buying decision. I think the most recent one I saw was like 8.5 decision makers. But you also need to know how to get in front of them, get in touch with them. And so, even if you're doing LinkedIn, you're limited at best to reaching out on LinkedIn, using InMail, or maybe getting a personal email address. And you really need multiple channels to reach out. I did a webinar not long ago where we talked about a multi-channel approach. And if you increase the number of channels you're reaching out on by 2, you're going to see a 400% increase in your response rates and engagement. So even if you've done all of the homework and you've identified exactly what your ICP is, what the companies are, the personas, the titles at those companies, you've got to know how to reach out to them. You've got to have phone numbers. You've got to have email addresses. You've got to have LinkedIn profiles. Increasingly, this was another great webinar I did recently, you're even seeing direct mail starting to reemerge, which also speaks to a lot of the trends and the noise in the market that we've talked about. That's becoming a channel a lot of people are tapping into.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk in the 5th tip. We've got a unique way of doing a form of direct mail that we're gonna talk about to break through that clutter. So, so to that point, so going into tip 2, right? So you start thinking about who your ideal customer profile is, but leveraging that methodology, the second thing that you can do is really understand your customer's inner voice, right? And there's a great book by Donald Miller called Building a Brand Story, where he really equates that the buying process is like a good story, right? There's a hero who has, or a main character who wants something. There's a reason, there's a problem, there's a reason why they can't get that thing. Like, so for us, what do they want? A lot of times our clients, want more sales, or they want that next round of funding, but their problem is they don't have enough leads or opportunities in order to get that next round of funding, right? So there's a difference between what you want and what your problem is. And then, like any good story, you meet a guy, you meet somebody who can help you, who can empathize with your problem and can give you a plan to be able to lead you to success, while at the same time, helping you to avoid failure. So in our case, success is that next round of funding, hitting your sales numbers, whereas failure, and it's important to really crystallize failure, because as you've heard time and time again, selling on an emotional level is, people buy on an emotional level, right? They buy, because they're excited about something, because they're fearful of something. It's really understanding not just what people want, but what the pain they're trying to avoid, or what they're trying to avoid. So for instance, in our case, and through a lot of the interviews we did, a lot of times people are trying to avoid, losing their job, right? Or not getting that next round of funding, or, not hitting that number, their number, maybe, the shame that goes around that, so avoiding shame. And so understanding what your character, and what is that customer's inner voice, what are they coming to work thinking about and fearful about or excited about, and what do they go home and are at night sweating about? And what that allows you to do is really think about how your service or product can transform your customer, right? Not just help them, but literally transform them, right? So at SalesRoad, we take a sales leader who feels out of control because they're under extreme pressure to accelerate revenue growth and don't have the time to build an SDR team that can deliver the opportunities needed to hit their numbers, right? So that's who they are before they, embark on the journey. And that character, we work to help transform them, right, into a sales leader who's in control of his team and his time while consistently crushing his quota and leading his company to dominate their market. And so when you can really uncover how you transform, not just how you help your clients, but how you can transform them into what they are today and into what they want to be, that's where the magic happens. And then you translate that into all of the different sales and marketing channels, with that inner voice in mind. How are you helping them to solve their problem? How are you helping them to avoid failure? And it's really magical when, because there's so much, like you said, clutter, and people are getting so many emails, so many different calls. And if you can really tap into their aspirations, you start seeing magical things happen in your appointment setting and your outreach. So before I go to tip 3, Jason, anything to add there?
Yeah, just in the interest of time, let's get on into tip 3.
All right, tip 3. Okay, so you've thought about your ideal customer profile. You've thought about what is going on in between their 2 ears. What are they fearful of? What are their aspirations? But then, like you said, Jason, it is such a cluttered world, and they're getting so many emails and so many cold calls, and you still have to find a way to get their attention, because you can't start speaking to them or relating to them unless they're actually listening to you and they're thinking about you. And there's so many times in cold calls, specifically, where people are saying something at the beginning of a cold call. Do you have a minute? How are you? Maybe they've got a good probing question. There's some merit to starting with a probing question, but what we found happens when you're using these types of techniques is, one, people are busy and they realize it's a cold call and they hang up on you, right? Or worse, maybe they kind of engage, but and you start talking, you start engaging with them, but they're not thinking about what you're saying. They are thinking about how to get you off the phone, and they're not processing the words that you're saying. And so what we've seen, and we've seen a lot of organizations starting to use it, and we've used it with tremendous success, is to go back to the old Sandler techniques of starting with an upfront contract before you launch in, right? And asking, something like, do you have 30 seconds, or, it's got to be less than 30 seconds, because it's got to be less than they think is going to take to get through your whole cold call. And ask them, if you give them a bit of information within 30 seconds, do you have permission to continue? And if not, they can hang up and leave as friends. And what we found is that more often than not, people are going to allow you to have that 30 seconds or that 26 seconds. And you can actually crystallize, how you are going to help them, how you can transform them in that period of time, and give them at least a nugget, and you can then speak to their inner voice. And so you've got to find a way to really break through and allow them to start listening to you. Otherwise, all the work we've done up till now is for naught, because you're not going to break through, and they're not going to hear from you.
Oh, it's great. That corresponds to part of the coaching I do for my sales team, which is, always have an intro or agenda slide, or at least discussion about, why are we here? What exactly are you going to get out of this? What are, set expectations, so that they know. Of course, that structure typically is more on a, account executive, qualified call as opposed to a cold call. But yeah, this makes perfect sense to extend it further down to your SDR, BDR team who's actually reaching out and making the cold calls.
All right. So tip 4, cutting through the noise, right? And so what a lot of times we get caught up in the typical tools that we have, right? The phone, email, even LinkedIn to some degree is starting to get cluttered. And one thing I urge people to do is take a step back again and just get a little creative, right? Have fun. Think about different ways that can be unexpected in your outreach. You talked about direct mail, and that's kind of unexpected. You send a handwritten note or things like that. But if you can really think and be creative about ways that you can get in front of your prospect. First of all, it's a lot of fun. It breaks up the monotony of what you might be doing. But a lot of times you can have 100% success rate. So there's another great book by Stu Henney, which is called How to Get a Meeting with Anyone. And he started a methodology called contact marketing, which is really, sending not just even direct mail, but certain types of gifts and whatnot in the mail to really break through the clutter. And a great example that he brought up is, if you remember the movie Hitch, Will Smith was trying to get a date or trying to get Eva Menendez to pick up the phone and call him back, right? And so what he ended up doing was sending her through courier a walkie-talkie, right? And she opened it up, and it was him on the other line. And so he had talked to a few sales folks who used this technique, right? So if you can't get a VP or a C-level person on the phone, and you send them something like a walkie-talkie or a burner phone or something like that, you've actually got a very high percentage chance of getting them on the phone because they've never gotten anything like that. And so if you challenge yourself to think about something creative that you can do that's not just the same song and dance that everyone else is doing, it can be an amazing way to cut through the noise and be able to get your message out and be able to speak to their inner voice.
Do you have any examples of successful things that you've done like this, or that you've worked with people on campaigns with, or what's oftentimes even more fun, or failures around attempts like this?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's one really good one. We have a client that is in not a crowded space, but there are two other very large competitors of theirs that are very difficult to unseat just because of their breadth. And one of the things that they tout that really can fall flat when said over the phone or in an email is their white glove treatment, right? Because they can, these are two 10,000-pound gorillas, and the way that they really can compete is through their amazing customer service. And what they say, and lots of people say, is white glove treatment, which is really, at the end of the day, a marketing word, and it's kind of a boring word. But instead, what we did is to 50 of the best prospects, we actually sent white gloves in the mail with a nice handwritten note about what we're doing and why we want to have the opportunity to at least explain how we give this type of white glove treatment. And so and with that we had an 86% return call rate, and of those I think was about 50% of those the return calls we actually booked a qualified appointment with. And so you're able to take, a message that is going to fall flat, right? It's going to fall flat in an email. It's going to, it's the type of word you kind of almost want to stay away from. But when you bring it to life for them, right, and do something like that, all of a sudden they're thinking differently, and they're all their mind shift changes and it allows them to read on and really give you a chance and listen to you. So that's just one example.
That's great. I'll share real quickly. It was both a success and a failure. We did a direct mail campaign one year for the holidays, and I'm out of Knoxville, Tennessee, which happens to be the home of Benton's Bacon. Anybody who's not familiar with it, it's world-renowned bacon, like Michelin star chefs use it, stuff like that. So we decided we'd get kitschy with it and send a Christmas campaign out with some Benton's bacon and messaging saying, bring home the bacon next year with our product. And most people absolutely loved it. But this also highlights, especially for direct mail campaigns, one of our strengths. Make sure you've got the right data on the people that you're sending direct mail to. So we had some mail, some of those went to, inboxes that just were not really checked very often. So we had bacon just sit there for a long time. So, making sure you've got the right address, but also make sure you have the address for where that specific person works. So in one case, we had a company we sent, several people's bacon to, and we sent it all to the headquarters. Come to find out, only the CEO worked at that quote unquote headquarters address. Everybody else worked remote. So not only did the CEO get like 6 packs of bacon, he was also Jewish. So yeah, fortunately, he had a good sense of humor about it. But yeah, some of those campaigns can risk going off the rails a little bit.
They can, but also what's the risk? It's a little cliche, but risk of not taking a risk, right? With some of the response rates that you have from regular campaigns, and with contact campaigns, when done the right way, when you really are relating to that person, and then doing something that they just don't expect, it really can shake things up a lot. And a lot of times, just like you said, you can spin a failure into a success. And so that individual, I'm sure, tells stories about these boxes of bacon that were sent to his office.
Oh yeah, I mean, years later, we'd run into him at an event and we'd laugh about it.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so last tip. So a lot of people write about voicemails, or don't leave voicemails because they feel like they're not getting a call back. And one thing that I would urge people is just to shift the mindset around the goal of a voicemail. Obviously, it's wonderful to get a call back, but there's 2 things to keep in mind. One, a voicemail can actually do harm if you're not doing it correctly, and it's sometimes creating benefits that you're not seeing, or you can drive activity that's not a callback that's beneficial to you. So really, I would really urge people not to think about, is voicemail successful or not successful just based on a callback, because really, a voicemail can do a few different things. One, it can humanize yourself to the prospect. So if they're getting a whole bunch of emails in your cadence and whatnot, and then they hear a voice that is human and relatable, it can increase the chance of that email being responded to. Also, a lot of times, and sometimes, when we have a good piece of information that we're sharing in an email, or an insight that we found on LinkedIn that we want to share with the prospect, just sending an email sometimes gets lost. There's a lot of filters now, or people aren't going to read it. And so if you really have spent time with an insight that you found about the prospect, or something you think is going to be helpful to them, leave it on the voicemail. Don't ask them for a call back, and just point them to your email. Because also, as you can't have a very long, you don't want to go on and on in your voicemail. So if you can create a very good targeted email and you leverage voicemail to have them read it, we've seen response rates on email going up.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, one thing that people lose track of a lot of times is, voicemail most effectively used is a one channel of a multi-channel, multi-touch strategy. So, people love to, cite stats that, it takes 8+ touches to convert somebody or get a conversation going. The key to that is if you don't leave a voicemail, then it's unlikely that that's going to count as a touch. The chances that they're going to look at the phone number and associate that with you. But you also want to make sure that you're tying this together. You're referencing what you've done in your other channels whenever you do that, because you have to bridge that psychological gap of what happened in one channel and tie that back to you across all those different channels.
Totally, 100%.
Cool. Well, we're a couple of minutes over, but I know you and I both said that we don't have a hard stop, so we can hang around as long as we've got questions. You mentioned several books in the presentation and the discussion, and Julie in particular had a question for you to repeat those books that you had mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first book on creating, that we found extremely helpful in developing ICPs and really going deep and understanding who your buyers are is a book called Buyer Personas, and it's by Adele Revella. That's Revella. And if you Google her, she actually has some great, I think, like little worksheets and things like that on her website that are helpful in really going through that process of interviewing your clients and really getting some deep, meaningful insights from them. So that's the first book. Second book is by Donald Miller. It's called Brand Story. And he also has a great website that I think you can sign up for tips and get like 1 tip a day. I would really recommend getting the book too, but you can get some great content from their website. And then the last book was Stu Heine. And his book is called How to Get a Meeting with Anyone. And that's really about using contact marketing and some of these, techniques of, it's not just really direct mail, but it's really thinking about how to, go deep with a touch that is both meaningful and unexpected, and potentially, spending a lot of money on that one touch. Because you think about how much time and hours it takes us to get some of those really good prospects on the phone and how much that meeting is worth. And if you spend maybe, $500, $300 on a really interesting thing that you're sending somebody that's meaningful and relates them, it can have extremely high response rates with those prospects that you just never could have gotten a hold of before.
All right, we've got a question from Mary. Which would you recommend as far as order of cadence? Call before email or email before call?
So we call before email just because if we do get them on the phone, then we want to have that conversation. And then if not, we leave that voicemail and send that email. And then also it's better, if we've really uncovered a good insight, it's always better to be able to do it live with them on the phone versus them reading the email. So it's always call before email.
Great.
For us.
All right, and then Sylvan's asking any suggestions on how to build your introduction to get attention and interest during your first call?
Yeah, I mean, so we really do find that upfront contract has been extremely helpful in getting that interest. So using the Sandler method, and I mean, to give you, I sort of went pretty fast during that part, but just to give you a sense, something to the effect of, I know I'm catching out of the blue, but could I take 26 seconds or 29 seconds or 30 seconds, whatever your pitch is, to explain why I reached out to you today, and then you decide if it makes sense to continue the conversation. And so, then they're pausing, they're thinking, okay, I'm going to let you have 30 seconds, 26 seconds, whatever it might be. And then you can give that introduction to your product or service that has to always relate to their inner voice. It has to be emotional. It has to really touch at the heartstrings. But as long as they've then said yes, then you have a golden period of time to really, lay it out. And that they're actually listening. And you have a chance of moving past that initial 26 seconds into a more meaningful dialogue.
I love that you use 26 seconds. And this is a tip or trick that I learned a long time ago. If you use a non-standard, non-round time, then for whatever reason, people tend to be more engaged around it. So if typically the meeting time is 30 minutes, offer them 25 minutes or 20 minutes, so that it's a shorter window than what they're typically used to blocking off. And yeah, I love the 26 seconds as a differentiator.
Yeah, we've found it very helpful. We've seen other organizations using it very successfully as well.
Well, cool. I'll give everybody one last chance to drop anything that they've got burning on their minds in. Otherwise, we'll wrap this one up. But drop anything in that you have here. Otherwise, David, thank you so much for being on with us today. This was excellent content. Like I said at the start, we'll share a link to the recording in the deck as soon as we've got the recording edited and tidied up for everybody. and then you can reply directly to that email if you have any additional questions around anything.
Great. Well,
Right,
thanks very much for having me. I enjoyed the time. Thanks everyone for joining in and for the questions. And good luck with everything.
Great. Thanks so much, David.